The ovary, as you can see here from the light microscopy, like the adrenal gland, has a central region and an outer region. So, of course, the central region we call the medulla, and the outer region we call the cortex. However, it does not have the same type of distinct boundary and border the way that we saw in the adrenal gland, so it is poorly defined. Really, the major way we tell them apart is, as you can see, the medulla here is basically where there is going to be the blood vessels and the nerves, things along those lines. And the key to the cortex is out here in the cortex is where we find the follicles. Follicles are basically the immature egg, what we call an oocyte, and its support cells. So we have an immature egg, okay, and the cells that are around it and support it. And as we'll learn when we get to the reproductive system, there are different stages in the development of this follicle. What we are going to focus on is the largest, the mature follicle. So this is what is known as a mature follicle. This is also known as a tertiary follicle. And this is also what is known as a Graafian follicle. Any of those names are fine. It starts with our oocyte. Notice that oocyte is surrounded by a cluster of cells that I'm just going to draw as a squiggly line, and a larger cluster of cells. And one of the key characteristics of this Graafian follicle is this large fluid-filled space known as an antrum. All of these cells that I've squiggled here in black, both in the surrounding follicle and the little bit that surrounds our egg, are all what are known as we'll call them follicular cells. But they're also what are known as granulosa cells. So all of these, and the ones around here, this here is the egg with its nucleus that we have there. All of these are the granulosa cells, or what we'll call follicular cells, because they make up the follicle. That makes sense? However, you will also notice around the outer surface is a thinner but denser layer of cells. This layer of cells on the outer surface are what are known as thecal cells. So here we have the basic anatomy of the ovary. And I'll be honest, I haven't looked at your histology list. I don't know how much of this you are really responsible for. But obviously we're in here because not only is this a structure that plays a role in, obviously, reproduction, producing the egg, half of the puzzle pieces needed to make another person, but because as an endocrine gland, it is also responsible for producing hormones. And of course, the thecal cells are responsible for producing what hormone? Exactly. Androgens. Wait, what? Yeah. The thecal cells actually produce androgens. Remember, as I mentioned briefly before, these granulosa cells, these cells that are making up the follicle, they actually convert androgens into estrogens. So it is the granulosa cells, it is the follicular cells, and for this section I'll let you use those two terms interchangeably. The follicular cells, the granulosa cells, are the ones that actually make the estrogens. Remember, estrogens is a class of hormones. But it turns out it doesn't just make estrogens out of thin air. Fecal cells make androgens, which are the building blocks that are then used to make the estrogens. And if you think back to when we saw those cholesterol-based steroid hormones, right, estrogens and androgens were really similar. So it only takes the changing of a couple of functional groups to change one into the other. All right? So we have our immature oocyte, we have our thecal cells that produce androgens, we have our follicular cells or granulosa cells that produce estrogens. All right, questions on that anatomy? So, estrogens, of course, are a class of hormones. I think there's something like 10 different estrogens, and by far the most common, the one specific hormone you are responsible for is estradiol. That is the most common of our estrogens. Produced, again, by those follicular cells in the ovary. And what are the targets of estrogens? Okay, the reproductive organs, but be more specific. To do what?
Mature.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I like that. So it is going to mature the reproductive organs. It is going to give those secondary sexual characteristics we talked about. All of those physical features associated with a female who is reproductively viable. Typically the enlarging of the breast, the widening of the hips, the enlargements of the mons pubis, all of the secondary hairs, all of those things we associate with someone who is capable of reproduction, right? It also not only matures the reproductive organs, is responsible for the secondary sexual characteristics, but it also matures the oocyte. Remember, this is an immature cell, and it needs to be matured. So it targets the ovaries, the uterus, the mammary glands. Developing the oocyte, developing the reproductive organs, plays a huge role in the formation of and thickening of the uterine wall, developing that for an expectation of implantation, right? And basically overall, it is the feminizing hormone. And how is it regulated?
Hormonally.
Hormonally via say again? One more time. Yeah, follicle stimulating hormone, exactly, right? Follicle stimulating hormone was one of the gonadotropins released by the anterior pituitary, so hormonally via the follicle stimulating hormone, which stimulates the follicle cell, the follicular cell. You'll notice your chart does a decent job of this. Notice over here we have an ovary, and in our ovary over here this big circle is supposed to represent that mature follicle. And if you looked at, put a little box around the part where the oocyte would be located. So we have the oocyte and the granulosa cells and the thecal cells around that. They've shown us a nice up close view of that there. But if I remember correctly, follicle stimulating hormone was it? Oh yes. I'm sorry? Yes, so when a female is pregnant, estrogen is going to help the development of the placenta as well, and will be produced by the placenta to help in the development of the baby. All right? All right, yes?
And the granulosa cells produce and convert, or do they just convert those cells?
Well, I mean, it's the same thing. They make estrogens, right? How they make the soup doesn't matter. As it turns out, the way they make estrogens is by taking an androgen, ripping a couple things off, putting a couple new things on, and poof, you have an estrogen. So really, it's the same thing. They are converting androgens into estrogens, or you can say they're making estrogens. It's the same thing. The end result is you have an estrogen. I don't care how you talk about how they make it.
So then, like specifically, the follicle stimulating hormone stimulates the fetal cells?
No, it stimulates the follicle cells to make the estrogens, to convert the androgens into estrogens. Was there another hand? Yeah.
Histology is what has corpus luteum. Is that?
That's where we're going next. All right? All right. Great questions. Any others on the follicle and follicle stimulating hormone and estrogens? Yes?
Alright, so with fecal cells making androgens, are they just like continuously doing that, or is there something that regulates them, or is it not something we're
Yes.
responsible for? Cool. Thank you.
Again, as we've talked about, everything is more complicated than we have. Yeah. We're not going to focus on what regulates the fecal cells, but yes, they are regulated as well. Okay. All right, yes.
The mature follicle is that whole structure, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, if you don't like my art, that is a mature follicle. Okay? Or tertiary follicle or grafting follicle, whichever of those phrases you like. If we go back to the ovary, this is also a follicle. That's also a follicle. This is also a follicle. This is also a follicle. This is a follicle. There are follicles, there's something like 7 different stages in the ovarian cycle when we get to it. So all we're focusing in is on this big, huge, mature follicle.
So that one on the bottom, right? is
Yeah,
the
this one would be,
mature
yeah,
follicle.
exactly. That probably is as well, we just don't have the egg in the section that they took. So yes, so what we're looking at is just this one. When we get to the reproductive system, we'll learn about all those other types of follicles. But for right now, we're just focusing here. All right? All right, excellent. Now, any other questions on this? Okay. Follicle stimulating hormone stimulates the follicular cells, causes the production of estrogens. And it was one of the gonadotropins that was made by the anterior pituitary. But there was another gonadotropin made by the anterior pituitary. What was that? Luteinizing hormone. And as we mentioned, luteinizing hormone is going to actually do 2 things. It is going to trigger ovulation. So basically what happens with this follicle, we'll just redraw it. All right, focusing just on the granulosa cells. It is going to cause that egg with a little bit of granulosa cells around it to be released into the interstitial fluid, hopefully getting into the uterine tube, and hopefully, or I guess not, depending, fertilize to propagate the species. All right? So this part goes away. But notice there's this big, huge, massive remaining cluster of granulosa cells. And that's the second thing that luteinizing hormone does. Luteinizing hormone transforms the remaining follicular cells. And it transforms it into this big, huge, massive glandular structure known as the corpus luteum. Let's start with the bad example of this. Here on your chart, we have that ruptured follicle where now the remaining follicular cells are being transformed into the corpus luteum. And again, they chunk a little chunk out, and so down here, this big, huge, thick, curvy thing is supposed to represent the corpus luteum. Let's get a better look at what this looks like. So, here is a mature follicle. Here's another mature follicle, another one here. And notice here, this structure here basically looks a lot like a burst bubble, because that's essentially what happened. Our follicle ruptured, released that egg, and the remaining granulosa cells here are now being converted into this big glandular structure known as the corpus luteum. It can start like this, looking as a popped balloon. But as this glandular structure grows and expands, it can become this big, huge, solid mass, right? Look at this difference in size. There's another mature follicle. And look at the size of this big, huge, massive glandular structure that is the corpus luteum. So that luteinizing hormone transforms that remaining granulosa cell into our glandular structure of the ovary, our second glandular structure of the ovary, the corpus luteum. All right? Luteinizing hormone. It luteinizes something, right? Turns it into the corpus luteum. What's special about this corpus luteum is the corpus luteum, not surprisingly, it was made of follicular cells, will produce estrogens, but at a lower level. The key to the corpus luteum is not only does it produce estrogens, but it also produces a second class of hormones, progestins. Progestins is the class, and of course, the most common specific is progesterone. So progestins is the class, progesterone is the most common. And this is basically the warning bell hormone. Right? Remember, the egg has been ovulated. Once ovulated, that egg's going to be viable for about 24 hours, in hopes during that time that it will be fertilized. If it is fertilized, though, it can take over a week for that fertilized egg to make it all the way to the uterus. So basically, once that egg is released, the female body needs to start preparing for pregnancy. This progesterone, and progestins in general, is a warning bell. It says, hey, the egg is on the loose, fertilization could occur any minute now, get ready for pregnancy. What are some of the big targets of that? The uterus. The uterus wall thickens dramatically, producing major blood vessels, producing major glands, so that there are lots of secretions to nourish and maintain that egg. And so that ultimately that fertilized egg can implant in the wall and be maintained for 40 weeks. So it is this big, huge warning bell alarm that goes off. right? It leads to the maturation of the mammary glands and anticipation. Basically, its job is to get the body ready for fertilization, get the body ready for pregnancy. And if the egg is fertilized, then it will maintain the uterine wall. It'll help to develop that egg, that bundle of cells that is growing, until, as was mentioned, the placenta finally forms at around week 9. And then, rather than the ovary and the corpus luteum, at that point, the placenta will produce the estrogens and the progestins necessary to maintain and mature the pregnancy. Of course, anything this big, this active, can only be maintained for a short period of time. If that egg is not fertilized, what happens is the corpus luteum starts to degenerate and go away. And if it degenerates and goes away, what happened to progestin levels? They decrease. And if progestin levels drop, can we maintain that big, full, glandularized, vascularized uterine wall anymore? No. So what ends up happening? Yeah, it should. Menses, and then the whole process starts all over again. We develop a new follicle, ovulation occurs, we develop a new corpus luteum, no pregnancy, shedding, rinse, repeat, recycle, reduce. I don't know what all of those are used words, right? Yes?
You said progesterone starts with, or is activated by luteinizing hormone, but to maintain it, the placenta carries on after that?
So, no, so let's not talk pregnancy, but I like where you're going. Because that brings us to the last obvious point, hopefully. How is the corpus luteum and these progestin levels regulated? Hormonally via luteinizing hormone. Not only does it make the corpus luteum, but it maintains the corpus luteum. So this is definitely regulated by luteinizing hormone. So if the egg is not fertilized, luteinizing hormone levels drop and the corpus luteum degenerates and goes away. Right? Because without that luteinizing hormone, we can't keep the corpus luteum pumping out progestins, and so corpus luteum goes away, progestin levels drop, menses occurs. Now, what happens if that egg is fertilized is a fertilized egg produces a very special hormone called human chorionic gonadotropin. And it turns out that human chorionic gonadotropin stimulates and maintains the corpus luteum. So if you have a fertilized egg, you are going to maintain the corpus luteum, meaning that progestin levels stay high. Maintaining the uterine wall, allowing the egg to implant, allowing for that pregnancy to continue, right? There are lots of different types of infertility problems people can have getting and maintaining a pregnancy. And one of them is that they don't have an issue with fertilization, but they may have an issue maintaining the pregnancy. So they get the egg fertilized, it may even implant, but they can't maintain the pregnancy, and so they often lose it within the first month or so. And one of the reasons for that can be a drop in progestin levels. So one of the things that they will do in that instance is after fertilization takes place, they will start taking progestin supplements, maintaining their high levels, maintaining their corpus luteum, maintaining their uterine wall, and being able to maintain the pregnancy.
You said it would be progestin like supplements, but shouldn't it be the luteinizing hormone, because that would support the corpus luteum continuing?
True, yes, but the problem is luteinizing hormone does other things as well. So yes, the goal of this is to make the progestins, but if there's a problem with that process, right, maybe these cells aren't as sensitive to the corpus luteum. Maybe that's why you're not producing as much of it. So if we supplement you with progestins, that's the end goal anyway. We want you to have high levels of progestin to maintain the pregnancy, and so we'll just go straight to that, right? It works the opposite as well. If you think about it, if you're pregnant, if you're developing a baby inside of you, do you necessarily want to be maturing and releasing new oocytes? No. So when you're pregnant, those high levels of progestin suspend egg maturation and ovulation. Why might that be useful? Birth control. The very first form of birth control pill were basically progestin pills. You would take a progestin pill, it would keep your progestin levels high, you would trick your body into thinking it was pregnant so it wouldn't mature a new egg, wouldn't ovulate that egg, right? Of course, at that time we thought menses was required, so you'd only get 3 weeks of those pills. Then after the 3rd week, you would stop taking a pill for a week, right? That would allow your progestin levels to drop. You'd have your menses that it would occur, and then you'd start taking the pills again, all right? Of course, as we know, girls are flighty, so they can't be expected to remember a whole week of not taking pills, so what did they start doing after that? Yeah, you would have 4 rows of pills. 3 real ones, and what was that 4th row of pills? Sugar pills. Basically a placeholder, right, so that you could take for that, right? Of course, now we appreciate and understand that, and again, it's so silly that it's taken us this long to figure this out. The whole reason that they had birth control pills set up in this fashion is because they felt that something bad would happen if menses didn't occur, right? There's some kind of toxins or something. I don't know what it is. Boys are idiots. But if you think about it, are you menstruating when you're pregnant for 9 months? And no one's died from not menstruating during that time. So a lot of the birth control pills now don't have that pill week, right? Even the pills that have, even the sets of pills that have those sugar pills, gynecologists are telling patients to just take 3 sets of pills and then start the next 3 sets of pills, right? You can go months without a menstrual cycle because on the birth control pill as a result of that. So again, our understanding of, and I'll get on that soapbox again when we get to the reproductive system, but the lack of effort and money that has gone into understanding how females work is laughable. But the point is, this is how this works. I'll get off my soapbox and get done. Yes?
Okay, you said it was regulated hormonally via luteinizing hormone.
Correct.
So what is-
Progestin levels are regulated hormonally by luteinizing hormone. Yes.
Okay.
Okay? Was there another half of that?
Oh, the luteinizing hormone is regulated by the pituitary?
Yeah. Luteinizing hormone is released by the pituitary gland, right? And how, anterior or posterior? Anterior. So how is it regulated? Hormonally via releasing and inhibiting hormones. So notice, one hormone regulates a second hormone, and that second hormone regulates a third hormone. No. No. I mean, progestins do all of these things, but I don't think it really controls any other hormones. All right, and you're right, as I mentioned, if the pregnancy does occur, then this corpus luteum only still is going to produce the hormones necessary, the estrogens, the progestins necessary for development of that baby for about the first 8 or 9 weeks, at which point the placenta is formed. And then the placenta provides all of those hormones, right? However, like we talked about, when we talk about targets, like the maturation of the mammary gland, does it care whether that progestin is coming from the placenta or coming from the corpus luteum? No, it's the same lock key fitting in the same lock, and it doesn't care who made the key. So yeah, so basically anything in the placenta, all of these hormones that are can be in the ovary and also in the placenta, basically all have the same effects. Yeah.
When we were talking about luteinizing hormone, in my notes I wrote it as prostaglandin. Is that the same as progestin?
No. Prostaglandins we talked about when we were talking about local hormones. They're a type of cyanoids that can play a role in helping to regulate control of reproduction and things like that, but more of development of copulation and labor and those types of things, so, yeah. All right? Oh, and I guess that should go back, although you did remind me, that did remind me of the other thing. Both estrogens and progestins, what class of hormones are these? Amino acid based or lipid based? Lipid based. Remember, the gonads were one of the places where we produce steroid hormones. So both hormones produced by the ovaries are lipid based. Yes?
I've seen women hormones spelled a different way. Is that the way you want to spell it?
No, I want you to spell it correctly. Whatever the correct way of spelling it is. I get one letter. Is it L-U-T, just Luke?
L-U-T-E-I-N.
E-I-N? There you go, okay. That makes sense, because it's L-U-T-E-U-M, so that makes sense. I get one letter, just like you do. That would have been wrong, but, all right. Excellent. I'm a horrible speller, but especially writing over my head, everything I write over my head always looks wrong to me. I can't write boat over my head and it looks wrong, so you'll have to forgive my spelling. I'll always go by what the book says, what the slides say. Don't pay attention to what I write on the board. All righty. Any questions on that?